This is the Bread Over Stones podcast, episode 11, Shame, Shame, Shame in the Family.
Welcome to the Bread Over Stones podcast, the show that gives grace-driven solutions to heal, unite, and inspire families. Your host is Matthew Morgan, a licensed professional clinical counselor in Ohio, a pastor, and my husband of over 20 years.
And my dad. He loves bringing families together and helping them relate better with one another.
At Bread Over Stones, you'll add to your toolbox as a parent and a spouse in order to improve the way you communicate, discipline, and ultimately show your love for your family.
So welcome to the show.
Welcome once again to another episode of Bread Over Stones, the podcast that gives grace-driven solutions to heal, unite, and inspire your family. This is Matthew Morgan. I am flying back again solo today because the missus is up taking care of stuff that she needs to do. So this is once again an outreach of Covenant Family Wellness. I provide online therapy, and now I'm about to have an office location for individuals and families in Ohio. You can find out more at covenantfamilywellness.com. That's the new exciting news, is that we're branching into an actual physical office. I'm really excited about that, but it has created a lot of extra work all of a sudden, just trying to get everything done. But this is an opportunity that fell out of the blue. It's been a great week for that. Just some great opportunities coming up. I'm really excited. I'll share more about that as we go along with some future episodes, since we have a little bit of time for that. So it's been a great week, but at the same time, it's been a really tough week. Had a lot of difficulties in the family, hit quite a few speed bumps, and probably more than speed bumps. They were very large potholes. And those of you in Central Ohio, you know what that's like, because we're still trying to dodge all of those from this past winter, the ones that have not been fixed yet. So, it's funny because when I started this, one of the worries that I had was, am I going to have enough material to actually fill a weekly episode? Got real worried about that. Are we going to be able to, find things that are meaningful and relevant? And after this week, I worry much less about that, because I'm going to be able to come to you from both an academic standpoint, but also a lot of what we're going through in our own personal family. And I'd like to be transparent. Not all therapists are, and that's okay. I think that's a great way for certain therapists to operate. For me, I've always been one of those who is much more down in the trenches with my clients. I want them to understand that, in fact, I am human, that we have our own struggles, that things are not always perfect, and they're not going to be perfect because life is inherently messy. Once we get something figured out, there's a whole new mess to contend with, and it's never going to be perfect. The power is going to go out at weird times. The tensions are going to be really high. The kid's going to get sick at a weird time. It just happens. That's the way life is. It's messy, it's dirty, it's unpredictable, and it's so much fun if you just let go and hang on for the ride. So not let go and hang on. That was weird. But let go and of trying to control, just hang on and enjoy the ride. So anyway, so the big theme for this week and my family seems to have been shame, because we were walking through that ourselves. I had a few issues that came up, and it was difficult. It was hard to talk about. I had to have some of those gut-wrenching talks with my wife that I did not like. She did not like. But it brought up some areas that we were not connecting in our marriage. And after 21 years, that still happens. I would love to say that everything's perfect, but it's not. We have those, again, little bumps in the road, sometimes those big potholes in the road. But through working through that, we were able to really find ourselves in a better place, in a sense, a place where we were more connected, where we were closer to each other, where we understood each other's needs a lot more, and we weren't being driven apart. And so just as we kind of got all of our mess figured out, a lot of late night talks, a lot of late working and trying to figure some of this out, our son went into full meltdown mode. Things were not clicking at all, and we weren't sure it's been rough for about 6 weeks or so. We weren't sure if it was just school not working right because he's just getting started with a new grade and a new class. If it was just a struggle of because my wife watches kids out of the house sometimes now that they're getting older, the dynamic has changed a little bit. So my therapist mind, I'm going through and I'm checking the boxes, trying to figure out what's going on. So we had one minor incident come up, and all of a sudden our son was in full meltdown mode. A lot of struggles, a lot of shame talking. And I had just finished listening to Brené Brown, and I'm going to link some of her stuff in there. But by all means, hit the Google search and whatever has Brené Brown attached to it, listen to it, podcast it, TED Talk it, book it. She is amazing. I was just watching her and she's so just, again, amazing. I enjoyed her talks. She hit right to the core of where I was. So again, I had walked through this. Then I found her material. It's BRENE with the little ch over the E. I don't know what the ch is, but you don't need a ch to Google search it. You can just Brené, BRENE, and Brown like the color. So anyway, total side note, coming back in. Okay, so we listened to, or I'd been talking to some of Brené Brown stuff. Oh, so my son is in meltdown mode, and I throw on the therapist cap because it's necessary sometimes. I try not to therapize my own child, but it happens. It's kind of like an accountant. You still have to do your own checkbook. So put on my therapist cap, and I basically call out his shame talk because he took an issue that was, man, I did a dumb thing, into I'm a stupid, stupid, stupid kid. And that's not the message that we ever try to give him. That's so far from what we try to give and what anybody in his life tries to give. It was a very weird message to come out. And so I jumped in there and I just talked to him a little bit about shame and the difference between shame and guilt. Because guilt would be something like, oh man, I did something stupid again, or I did something dumb, or I forgot, because for crying out loud, I'm an 8-year-old kid and I'm going to forget sometimes. So we went through all of that, and I told him, look, that's feeling guilty, but what you're telling me is that you feel like you are a bad person because of this. And that's so not the message. And I sat down and just really wanted to know, where in the world is that coming from, Baba? And so I talked to him. So there's a huge difference between being a bad kid and doing bad things. And I'm all into myself at this point. I'm feeling pretty good. I think, you know what? This is the best pep talk ever. I'm a great motivational speaker in my own family. I live in a van down by the river. And he's going to listen to my big old motivational speech, and he's going to suddenly feel better about himself. He's going to go out and win the football game, quit smoking doobies in a van down by the river. He's going to take the ring to Mordor with his friend's help. He's going to win the day, and we're all going to be happy. Oh, I was so wrong. Instead, he went from being frustrated into what I can only describe as a cry of anguish. It went from being mad at the situation to something deep down. And for the life of me, I will probably never, ever, ever forget that cry. That is going to be one of those sounds that I take with me forever, because there was something more going on in his life. And I go to movie quotes, right? That is the sound of ultimate suffering. My heart made that sound when the 6-fingered man killed my father. I go to my Inigo Montoya. It really was. It was a sound of suffering. And so as we talked to him about that and where it came from, he started telling us about a questionable choice that he had made in his life 6 weeks ago. He said, Dad, you remember when? And I said, yeah, buddy, I remember that. He goes, this is actually what was going on. Pooh, my mind blew because he had been carrying this around for 6 weeks as an 8-year-old. This message had sat in there and festered in him. It had gotten infected, and it just kept repeating this. And that's where that "I'm a bad kid" message came from. And I thought, oh my goodness. Okay, now I am clearly a trained therapist, so I was able to see through no, not really. Even as a therapist, my kid can be very good about hiding things. And we all can be very good about hiding things, because that is the thing that shame does. That's its first response. And I know probably my audience, you all come from a wide range of theological backgrounds, so I want to be cognizant of that, but at the same time, I think there's a narrative that I want to use from the Bible, and that is the story of the first sin. When sin entered the world, most of us know that. It's a fairly familiar theme. Adam and Eve, God says, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Satan comes and tempts Eve and says, hey, did God really say to do that? Eve says, I don't know, but it looks pretty good. And so she, long story to get to the end, of course, we know that she eats this fruit. She then passes it over to Adam, who did not have her back in the midst of all of this, and says, hey, try this. It's pretty good. And so he does. And their first response then is, whoa, we are naked. And they ran and they hid in the bushes from God, which of course is funny to think about, because our concept of God generally is that he is in fact everywhere. So hiding from God would be a little bit challenging. But that was it. The only other being that they knew, this isolated them from him. Now, Adam, because Eve gets such a bad rep in this whole Adam and Eve story, everybody, man, she ate us out of house and home. We don't like her. This is why we have pain in childbearing. And I'm sure there's a long line of women up there to thank Eve for that wonderful experience. But Adam does this phenomenal thing in the midst of all of this. And I believe that only a man has the capacity to actually do this. Because God asks him, hey, what's going on, guys? And Adam says, well, we were naked. And God says, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat of that tree that you weren't supposed to do? And Adam says, you know what, God? That woman you gave me, and I can just stop right there, because only a man could isolate himself from every other living being or relationship that he has all in one fell swoop. It didn't take that long, because he blamed Eve. He blamed God, but ultimately what he was experiencing was not just the first sin, but the first shame. And it was driving him away from everybody else. And that's what shame does. And shame still works that way. Because when I was going through that in my life, shame pushed me away from my wife and drove me to other stupid things to fill needs that weren't there. When my son did something that was a perfectly understandable mistake, and it's something that happens and it's something that everybody else goes through, it drove him to this point of being away from everybody else. So that's the first thing that shame does, is it divides us. The next thing it does is it tells us we are not blank enough. Simply, we are not enough. And you can fill in whatever adjective you want to fill in between not and enough, because that's the message of shame. Shame says you are not rich enough. You are not good looking enough. You are not skinny enough. You are not fast enough. You are not strong enough. You are not man enough. You are not woman enough. Whatever it is, shame divides all of that by telling you that you're not enough. And keep in mind, the first thing it did was divided us from anybody that could give us good feedback on that. So now we're alone. We're left with a self-deprecating message, and then it just digs in its claws, and it perpetuates, and it gets stronger and harder and more difficult. There's a greater sense of blackness that comes from the shame and just darkness, not having any light, not having any ability to see what's going on. And it's so challenging, and it's so difficult to have to get through that. So shame will wreck your family. Now, keep in mind, the whole nature of a family is to be a unit that functions together. You have to have each other's back. That's what Adam and Eve should have done. They should have had each other's back and protected each other, but they didn't. Families now, that's really, and I know, trust me, those of you who are listening who are like, yeah, right. Trust me, I know families don't always work that way, especially our family of origin that we are born into. Sometimes we have narratives for that family that are challenging and hurtful and painful because they don't have our backs and they have allowed those shame messages to continue, or in some cases have added to it. Hey, let's just throw more stuff on this. So shame will start to do that. And as well, though, once we marry into a family or choose a family or bring in people for a relationship, we can have those same issues. And a lot of times those shame messages, we don't find them out until much later down the road. So family is supposed to be able to work through that, but instead, some cases it doesn't. And if they don't know those weak points of what we're going through, there's no way that somebody else can have our back, right? It seems very obvious when we talk about it that way. If I'm struggling with something and somebody doesn't know it, they're just going to keep on doing what they want to do, right? If my back is hurting and my son keeps jumping on me, right, then if he doesn't know that this is painful, he's going to keep on doing it. Not because he's mean or hurtful or spiteful, just because he doesn't know. This made me think back. I had a meeting with a certain individual in my life, and he had heard stories about me and the fact that I like to joke or tease, or that I can be, on rare occasions, just a little skosh of a bit sarcastic. And so my reputation apparently preceded me in this. And so within the first 5 minutes of meeting this young man, he made a fabulous joke about my weight, and I believe followed it up with one about my height, and then had to throw one in about my looks, because apparently his family narrative was, that's what you talked about, and that was the way you talked to people. My family was not that way. I was not amused, because what he did is he just gave a 3-shot to all of my major shame points at that time. Now, you see, I stand at a towering, and I know most of you who are joining by audio can't quite see this, but I stand at a towering 5'4". Although I went to the doctor's, a new doctor, and she said I was 5'5.5". So I love this doctor. I'm going to be there forever, because 5'5.5" is huge compared to 5'4". Those of you who are in my European contingent that listen to this podcast, I apologize. I have no metric conversion for that because I'm American and I didn't learn the metric system that quickly. So, but at 5'4", of course, I tower over most third graders. And then after that, it's pretty much a toss-up. So that's one shame point. Another shame point is my weight. And that has always been a struggle for me. I was the fat kid in middle school. I went through a very brief period of being both athletic and anorexic at the same time. Very rare for a male, but yay, go me. I can always bring in those things. And so I lost a lot of weight, got very sick, and then kind of built back up from that. And those of you, again, joining by video can tell I'm okay in that department now. But it has been a struggle, and I work hard to keep it down, but it doesn't happen easily. And so I have a lot of self-consciousness about that. And unfortunately, when you're a fat guy, everybody assumes that it's okay to joke about being a fat guy. Because obviously I know about it, but that doesn't make it any easier. So that was another shame message that I got. My grandfather, he was much better natured about this because my grandfather was built very much like me. And he said I was built like a brick outhouse. He said other things, but this is a family show, and he was a Navy man, so figure that one out. So anyway, so weight, height, looks, all of that is wrapped up. And I'm not an incredibly vain person, I don't think, but those are definitely some shame points for me. And that's what shame does, is it opens up this weak point for attack where we can be harmed. And so what we really need to do is bring that shame back into the light. That's the hardest thing. Trust me, I know. It sounds so easy when you say it this way. Hey, all you need to do is bring this up. But that is the most terrifying first step. And it hurts, it's painful, and it's scary, and it's terrifying. And if you're thinking about that, if you are thinking about your own shame points and how much it would hurt to bring those up, you are not alone. Another movie we watched recently was The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, based off the C.S. Lewis book, which is absolutely amazing. And in this movie, Eustace, who is a generally horrible human being at the very start of this, he's turned into a dragon because of his greed. And it's interesting because when he comes to Aslan, having gone through his character change, he basically just has to kind of show himself, hey, this is what happened. And he tells Aslan or goes to Aslan and says really that he's hurting. And Aslan does this wonderful scratching motion, and it starts to pull the scales away, and it's painful for him. And that's really what bringing shame is. When we bring it into the light, it hurts and it's hard. When my son had to admit to the things that he had done, he couldn't even get the words out. He just bawled, and that was all he could do to get it going. And we had to work at it. We had to spend time with him. So what I want to do is work as a family to bring this shame into the light. See, the first thing we have to do is find out what those shame triggers actually are, because everybody's is different. And even though somebody may be your child or your spouse and you think you may know it, you may not always know it. Children don't have the same shame points as their parents do. So you have to, number one, know other people's shame points. But I think before you do that, so like 1/2 or whatever, you have to know your own shame points. What are your own shame messages? What are the things that hurt you when you hear them? So know those, because that's going to affect how you react to other people. And in some cases, when those overlap, it's a beautiful point of empathy, and it's a beautiful point of being able to gather with that person and say, I understand, my shame point is that too. But there may not be an overlap. It may be something completely different. So what are you going to do about that? You can't disregard their shame point as something that just because it's not yours, and you can't compare it. So know your shame points. Know what other people's shame points are. What is it that is not blank enough in their life? Are they not good enough? Are they not smart enough? And doggone it, do people not like them? What is it? So that's the trigger. But also the second thing is that you need to know the shame effects in your family. Knowing the triggers is one thing, but the second part is what effect does that trigger have? Does it cause you to go into isolation? Does it cause you to fill that shame void with something else, something different? What effect does that have on the family? Because again, if shame is going on, the family is divided. Your kid's sitting up in the room and somebody may say, hey, Billy's been up in his room for the last 3 weeks. Why is he not coming out? Well, he's a lazy teenager. Maybe he's not a lazy teenager. Maybe there's something shameful going on in his life that causes him to not want to come out. And it's not always what we think. Sometimes it may just be that he's self-conscious about eating in front of people. Sometimes it may be that he's struggling with some issues that need brought up. And that can be terrifying to bring up because we don't know if we are capable of healing that as a parent. And I would probably say that most of us aren't capable of healing it. But that's okay. Because what we're doing, again, is bringing it into the light. Find what those triggers are, find what those effects are, and discuss it with other people. All right. Now, you can go back to previous messages. There's a lot of overlap with that. But why is this shame a problem? Talk to them about that. Don't judge quickly. Don't correct them. Don't change them. And this is usually what happens. Let's take a look at the superficial one that most of us see is, Susie is not wanting to come out of her room, or she's not wanting to engage with people because she's not pretty enough, because somebody was making fun of her for the way that she looked, because she had long hair, short hair, whatever it may be, right? So bring that into light. Well, why is that an issue? And what most of us do is, oh no, you're pretty. You're pretty. Just know that you're pretty and it's fine. But it's many times deeper than that. Why is this a shame message? Why is it important for you to be pretty for this person or for this social media? What is it that you're missing? What is it that's not enough about you? And then empathize with them. Oh, I understand. Maybe not. Maybe you don't understand. What you're telling me is, this is what you're thinking. This is what you're feeling right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, and feel free to be wrong. It's okay. This is where the discussion goes. And notice what we're doing. We're peeling back all these different layers for this shame. And what we're doing is bringing the shame into the light where it can't live and grow anymore. Shame is like a fungus. And if we're down in a basement and it's mildewy and moldy and damp, that shame can just keep on growing and growing and growing and being bigger and scarier and uglier and smellier. But when we bring light to it, it kills it. And that starts with, and Brené Brown brings this up, and that starts with empathy. I understand, or I want to understand what's going on with you. And don't say, I understand. Say, so what you're telling me is you feel shame because they made fun of you for the way that you looked. Because you feel like you're not pretty enough. For what? Many people are just afraid of being alone. So call it for what it is. Bring shame out and discuss it. And once we've brought it to the light, then we can start developing an antidote for it. What can we do? What can we change to shame to make it better for us? In some cases, it might be, hey, let's put a little bit of a filter on the internet. Or let me check and see what you're watching, what you're browsing, so that we don't have to deal with this shame message again and again and again. It may be, hey, let's talk about these kind of issues. Let's sit down and discuss this at a family gathering. Why don't you feel pretty? Why are you struggling with a pornography issue? Why are you, I'm just trying to think of some different examples of shame messages here. Why is it that you're working so much to get more money and more money and more money? So the challenge for this week is have this discussion with your family. Talk to them about shame. Talk to them about how shame affects you as a person, what you struggle with. Sometimes that can be very challenging for a parent to be vulnerable. But what you're doing, again, by bringing your own shame into the light, by bringing your own empathy level to this and allowing them to empathize, suddenly their shame is not as big and ugly and scary anymore. And so it's going to come back and you're going to feel better for it. There's all different resources out there. And I barely scratched the surface on shame. And in fact, I think it's one of the least documented principles in therapy yet. But we're getting better at it. Brené Brown has worked at it. And I would encourage you, if you are struggling with shame messages in your own life, if your family is being divided because of shame, one of the healthiest things that you can do is find a good, empathetic counselor in your area. Obviously, if you're in Ohio, that's great. I'm here. I know there are only, thousands of others who are also qualified to deal with this. I'm not unique in this way. And more often than not, we always hear the message of, I'm the only person that's struggling with this, but here's what it is. And what most likely you'll hear from your counselor is, you know what? You're not alone. A lot of people struggle with that. There's something very normal about it. We don't want to stay in it forever, but we want to know, hey, you're okay where you are. So again, a very brief overview of shame. I hope that it has hit home for somewhere. I hope it's something that you needed to hear in your family. So have that discussion. Talk to your family about shame, about what it looks like, and what you're going to do about it. As I close, one of the things that has affected us as a family positively, and I picked this up in college, is the difference between a come-in and a call-in. And one of the things that we've told our son is that, you know what, if you come to us with a problem or with a struggle or a mistake that you have made, the punishment is much, much, much less than if we catch you in the act of doing whatever it is. You see, because if you're coming to us, most of the time the punishment's already there because you've already punished yourself enough. But if you lie on top of it, then that's an additional problem that we have. And in fact, after everything fell apart this week, he talked to my wife the next morning and he says, "Why did I not get punished for what I did?" And we said, "Buddy, you got punished enough from you." That cry in his heart was enough to know that he was contrite and he was broken and there was no punishment needed. And instead we worked together. We did a bread over stones moment, and we worked together to inoculate him against doing that again and to be able to help him through that. And when my wife and I went through the same thing, it was the same thing. There was no punishment. It was, what can we do to fix? Because fixing it gets us somewhere. Punishment drives us apart. So I hope that this has hit you well. I hope that you are able to receive the bread of God's grace this week and that you have an amazing chance to pass it on to others. Thanks a lot for joining me. I will see you next Monday with a new episode of Bread Over Stones. Have a great week. Special thanks to Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com for the music at the opening and closing of this show. The opening song was Carefree. The closing one was Cattails. They're both licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.
This show, its host, and its guests are here to provide accurate and helpful educational information. This is not a substitute for personal counseling, and it shouldn't be taken as legal, accounting, medical, or other professional advice.
If you need a professional, you should find one in your area.